Farouk El-Baz was born in 1938 in the soft-breathing heart of Egypt, in a world that still moved at the rhythm of the river and the sun, in a time when the night sky was not yet crowded with satellites or glowing with airplanes, but open, wide and mysterious, a ceiling of infinite questions stretching over the Nile Delta, where his first memories would form. He did not arrive into noise or privilege or ambition, but into quiet routines, into fields of green that bent in the wind, into long afternoons of light and shadow, where the world seemed ancient and patient and full of stories that no one had yet spoken aloud to him, but which somehow he already felt resting inside his chest. As a child, he was neither loud nor restless. He was observant. He noticed patterns. He listened more than he spoke. He learned the language of place before he learned the language of books. The way the soil changed color after rain. The way birds drew invisible maps across the sky. The way the moon rose differently in each season. He would walk for long stretches along canals and fields, watching the land with a seriousness uncommon in boys his age, as though the earth itself was speaking to him in a language only he could hear. At night, when other children surrendered to sleep, Farouk would often lie awake beneath the open sky, studying the stars, not with wonder alone, but with quiet concentration, as if he sensed that those distant lights were not decorations of the universe, but destinations of thought. The stars did not make him feel small. They made him feel curious, and curiosity, even then, was the engine of his life. School did not cage him. It gave him tools. He learned quickly, not because he chased grades, but because learning felt natural to him, like breathing. Teachers noticed his attention, his patience, his hunger for understanding how things fit together. When he discovered geology, it felt less like a subject and more like a recognition, as if the earth he had been listening to all his life had finally introduced itself by name. He studied at Ain Shams University in Cairo, where the city hummed with change, ambition, politics, and new ideas. Cairo in the 1950s and early 60s was alive with contradictions, old stone and modern dreams, colonial shadows and revolutionary hope. Farouk walked its streets as a young man, carrying notebooks and questions, absorbing not only his studies, but the world around him, understanding that knowledge never lives in classrooms alone. It lives in cities, in people, in history, in the tension between what is and what could be. He earned his degree in geology, then his master's, and then he did something that would quietly change the direction of his life forever. He left Egypt. America was not familiar, not gentle, not comforting. It was vast and fast and demanding. But Farouk had never been afraid of large things. He continued his studies, eventually earning his PhD. He was no longer the boy from the Delta watching the sky, yet he carried that boy inside him everywhere he went. His accent, his memory of deserts and rivers, his patient way of thinking, all followed him across oceans. Geology became more than a profession. It became his lens on existence. He studied landscapes not as static scenery, but as living archives of time. Mountains were not just stone, they were frozen motion. Deserts were not empty. They were conversations between wind and centuries. Rivers were not water. They were memory moving. Then history came calling. In the 1960s, the world turned its eyes upward. The United States, locked in a cold war of ideologies and pride, announced the boldest ambition of the modern age, to send human beings to the moon. It was a dream wrapped in urgency, competition, and risk. Engineers built machines that defied gravity. Astronauts trained their bodies to withstand forces unknown. But none of it mattered if they did not understand the land they were going to touch. The moon was not smooth. It was scarred, fractured, ancient, and dangerous. It was a world of craters and shadows, slopes and unknowns, and NASA needed someone who could read a landscape the way a historian reads a manuscript. They found Farouk El-Baz. He joined the Apollo program not as a celebrity, not as a headline, but as something far more important, a quiet architect of safety. He studied lunar photographs, mapped surfaces, analyzed craters, and trained astronauts how to recognize terrain, how to understand what the moon was telling them beneath their boots. When astronauts practiced walking on simulated lunar landscapes on Earth, Farouk was there, guiding them, teaching them the language of another world. While rockets thundered and cameras flashed, Farouk worked in silence. He traced shadows, he measured slopes, he translated stone into survival. When Apollo astronauts stepped onto the moon, they did so carrying his work beneath their feet. He never claimed the spotlight. He never needed to. His reward was in knowing that human beings had crossed a cosmic ocean safely because someone had listened carefully to the ground. After the moon, the Earth called him home. From orbit and satellite images, he began to study deserts again. But now from the sky, he saw patterns invisible from the ground, ancient river systems buried beneath sand, water hidden in places the world believed were lifeless. He understood that deserts were not dead, only quiet, storing their stories for those patient enough to learn how to read them. Egypt never left his heart. No matter how far he traveled, he carried his homeland inside his thinking. He spoke often of development, of education, of the future of Arab science, of the responsibility of knowledge. He believed civilizations were not built by slogans or power, but by minds trained to ask better questions. He taught, he mentored, he inspired. Generations of students learned that science was not cold, not distant, not reserved for others. It was theirs. Years passed. The world changed. Technologies multiplied. New conflicts arose. Yet Farouk remained constant, measured, calm, rooted in the slow discipline of understanding. He became a bridge between worlds, between desert and space, between Egypt and America, between the ancient and the modern, between curiosity and achievement. His life unfolded not in sudden triumphs, but in steady devotion. And still, in quiet moments, the boy who watched the stars from the Nile Delta remained awake inside him. As the years carried him forward, Farouk El-Baz came to understand something that many brilliant minds never truly grasp: that knowledge is not a destination, but a way of traveling through life. He did not see his work with Apollo as a peak, but as a doorway. Once the moon had been touched and mapped, and understood enough for human footsteps, he felt the pull of the earth again, strong and persistent, as if the deserts of his childhood were calling him back across the silence of space. From his position within the scientific world, he began to examine satellite imagery of the great deserts of Africa and the Middle East, looking not only at what was visible, but at what had once been there. Where others saw endless sand, he saw the ghosts of rivers, the memory of lakes, the scars of ancient rainfall that had shaped civilizations long before any modern map existed. His mind moved easily between epochs, treating time as another landscape, one that could be read with patience and care. He became deeply involved in the study of arid lands, remote sensing, and desert development. He worked with space agencies, research institutions, and universities, using satellite data to reveal underground water sources and forgotten geographies. In doing so, he offered hope to regions long dismissed as barren. suggesting that their future was not fixed by their present appearance, but by how deeply humans were willing to understand them. Despite his growing reputation, Farouk remained a man of simple habits. He spoke softly. He listened attentively. He carried himself not as a hero of science, but as a servant of it. When he spoke of space exploration, he did not emphasize national pride or political rivalry. He spoke instead of perspective, of how the Earth, seen from orbit, erased borders and arguments, and reminded humanity that it was one fragile community floating through the dark together. He often returned to Egypt, lecturing at universities, meeting students, advising policymakers, encouraging scientific investment, reminding his country that its ancient history of knowledge must not remain locked in the past. He believed that the future of Egypt, and of the Arab world more broadly, would depend on education, research, and the courage to ask difficult questions. He spoke of water scarcity long before it became a crisis in global headlines. He warned of environmental degradation. He called for sustainable development in desert regions. His voice was not loud, but it was persistent. The voice of someone who understood both the fragility and the potential of the land. As the decades unfolded, Farouk became a living archive of the space age. Young scientists came to him not only for guidance but for stories, for the human texture behind the achievements they studied in textbooks. He spoke of the Apollo astronauts not as legends, but as men who learned, practiced, stumbled, and persevered. He described the moon not as a trophy, but as a classroom where humanity learned humility in the face of the universe. Yet for all his work among stars and satellites, Farouk remained deeply rooted in the soil of human concerns. He believed science must serve society. Knowledge must reduce suffering. Discovery must improve lives. Without that, he felt, progress was merely decoration. Time continued its steady movement. New generations rose. The world shifted through digital revolutions and geopolitical storms. Still, Farouk remained present, engaged, relevant, his mind never retreating into nostalgia. He adapted. He learned. He stayed curious. When he spoke of the future, he did not predict it. He invited people to build it. And often, in quiet conversations, he returned to a single idea: that civilizations collapse not because they lack resources, but because they lose the patience to understand them. The deserts, he would say, had taught him that. As Farouk El-Baz moved deeper into the later chapters of his life, something subtle began to change around him. The world did not change him. Rather, the world began to recognize him differently. What had once been seen simply as scientific work was now understood as something broader, something rarer, a philosophy of existence rooted in patience, humility, and long vision. His lectures were no longer only about geology or remote sensing or the moon. They were about time itself, about how humans relate to the Earth and to each other when they slow down enough to truly observe. He traveled widely, from conference halls in Europe to classrooms in Africa and the Middle East, carrying with him the same message he had formed as a boy beneath the Delta sky: that curiosity is the most powerful force a human being possesses. Where fear closes doors, curiosity opens them. Where anger hardens minds, curiosity softens them. Where politics divides, curiosity connects. He spoke often of young people, of their responsibility to inherit not only knowledge, but wisdom. He worried that the speed of modern life was teaching them to skim over reality instead of sinking into it, to collect facts instead of cultivating understanding. He reminded them that the universe does not reveal itself to those who rush. When Egypt faced moments of uncertainty and transition, Farouk's voice remained steady. He avoided extremism of thought, believing that true reform does not emerge from chaos, but from careful construction. He advised governments and institutions not as a politician, but as a scientist, asking the same questions he had always asked. What do the data tell us? What does the land need? What will sustain future generations? He had seen what happened when humans misunderstood their environment. He had watched civilizations rise and fall through the silent testimony of rocks and sand. He knew that ignorance of nature always exacted a price. Through it all, he never forgot the emotional dimension of science. He spoke tenderly of the moon, not as a conquest, but as a companion in human imagination. He remembered the first time he held the photographs that would determine where men would land on another world. He remembered the silence of those moments, the weight of responsibility, the strange intimacy of touching another world through analysis and care. The astronauts he trained aged, retired, some passed on, and Farouk carried their stories with him. He reminded listeners that the moon landings were not simply technological achievements, but deeply human ones, the product of trust, cooperation, and shared purpose. He continued teaching, writing, mentoring, always expanding his circle of influence, not through authority, but through generosity. Students left his presence, feeling not impressed, but encouraged, as if they had been invited into a much larger conversation than they previously knew existed. In private moments, he reflected on his own journey with quiet astonishment. A boy from the Nile Delta, shaped by fields and stars, had helped guide humanity to the moon and back again, and yet his sense of self had never inflated with his achievements. He remained grounded, almost stubbornly so, as though the earth he had studied so closely would not allow him to float away on pride. The years brought grey to his hair, softness to his voice, but not to his mind. His curiosity did not fade. If anything, it deepened. With age came a broader patience, a greater acceptance of uncertainty, an understanding that not every question demands an immediate answer. And still, when he stood beneath an open sky at night, he felt the same quiet pull he had known as a child, the sense that existence itself was speaking softly, endlessly, waiting for someone to listen. As Farouk El-Baz moved into the later seasons of his life, the world around him accelerated, but he did not. Technology raced ahead, information flooded every corner of society. Yet he remained anchored in the slow discipline of thinking. He observed with gentle concern how quickly people reached conclusions, how rarely they allowed understanding to mature, and how often noise replaced meaning. He did not condemn these changes. He simply reminded others that speed, without depth, leads nowhere lasting. He often spoke of the earth as if it were an old companion. He described deserts as patient teachers and mountains as guardians of memory. He believed that the land itself carried the story of humanity, and that anyone who learned to read its language would never feel truly lost. In his lectures, he returned again and again to this idea, that the universe is not something outside of us, but something we are already part of. Even as his global reputation grew, Farouk never detached from Egypt's everyday life. He followed its struggles, its hopes, its transformations, and its unfulfilled dreams. He spoke carefully, always aware of the weight of words. He believed the role of intellectuals was not to dominate conversations, but to clarify them, to bring calm where there was confusion, to bring evidence where there was speculation, to bring long-term vision where short-term thinking threatened the future. His work on desert development expanded in importance as the world confronted climate change, water scarcity, and population pressure. Governments and institutions sought his insight not because he offered easy solutions, but because he understood systems, natural, social, and historical, and how they interacted over time. He taught that human survival would depend not on conquering nature, but on cooperating with it. Through all of this, he never stopped being a teacher. Even in informal gatherings, even in casual conversations, his mind gently guided others toward clearer thought, toward patience, toward respect for complexity. He did not impose his ideas. He invited reflection. Those who spoke with him often left feeling steadier, as though the world had slowed just enough to make sense again. As he entered advanced age, he became increasingly reflective, not about his accomplishments, but about the journey of humanity itself. He wondered whether people would learn in time the lessons written in stone and sand. He hoped that the same curiosity that once drove humans to explore the moon would one day drive them to protect their own fragile world with equal dedication. Yet he did not grow pessimistic. He had seen too much of human potential to surrender to despair. He had watched ordinary individuals accomplish extraordinary things when given the chance, the guidance, and the belief that their questions mattered. In quiet evenings, sometimes alone, sometimes among friends, he would look at the night sky and smile faintly, remembering the days when that sky was his workplace, his classroom, his map. He carried no regret. His life had unfolded with coherence, guided by curiosity, shaped by service, sustained by patience. And so, the boy who once walked the edges of the Nile Delta fields had become an elder whose thoughts now spanned planets and centuries, whose influence stretched quietly across classrooms, laboratories, policies, and dreams, whose story continued not as a monument, but as a living thread woven into the ongoing fabric of human understanding. As the world moved deeper into the 21st century, Farouk El-Baz became, without ever seeking it, one of its quiet witnesses. A man who had seen the age of handwritten maps give way to satellites, the age of propellers give way to rockets, the age of borders give way to orbits. He stood at the intersection of eras, holding the memory of the past and the possibility of the future in the same steady gaze. He followed the unfolding challenges of the modern world with measured attention. Climate instability, environmental degradation, water stress, the spread of misinformation, the growing distance between knowledge and wisdom. These concerns did not frighten him, but they did sadden him. Not because the problems were unsolvable, but because the solutions demanded patience, cooperation, and humility, qualities that societies too often sacrificed in pursuit of speed and power. He continued to advocate for science education, particularly in developing nations. He believed that no region of the world was poor in potential, only in opportunity. He urged leaders to invest not merely in infrastructure, but in minds. He reminded them that no bridge, no dam, no skyscraper could ever equal the long-term impact of a child who learns to think critically. Students still came to him, some timid, some confident, many unsure of their place in the vast machinery of modern life. He welcomed them all with the same calm presence, encouraging each one to trust the process of learning, to remain curious even when answers were slow to arrive, to resist the temptation of certainty when understanding was still unfolding. He told them that the universe rewards those who listen carefully. In his own private reflections, Farouk often returned to the deserts. He thought of the ancient rivers now hidden beneath sand, of the civilizations that had flourished and faded along their banks. of the long conversations between earth and sky that continued regardless of human timelines. He found comfort in these thoughts. They reminded him that life is not a race, but a dialogue. Despite the passage of years, he remained remarkably present. He did not live in memory. He lived in awareness. Each new discovery, each new image from space, each new student question renewed his sense of wonder. Curiosity had not aged within him. It had matured. He observed how modern humanity had grown simultaneously, more connected and more isolated. How information had multiplied while attention had diminished. How knowledge had expanded while wisdom struggled to keep pace. He believed the answer lay not in rejecting progress, but in slowing the heart of progress just enough to allow understanding to breathe. He spoke of cooperation between nations not as an idealistic dream, but as a practical necessity. He had seen what humans could achieve when they aligned their efforts for a shared goal. The moon landings remained his most powerful example. Thousands of minds, one destination, no room for ego, only room for precision and trust. That same spirit, he believed, must now guide humanity's response to Earth's challenges. In moments of quiet, when conversation faded and the world grew still, Farouk would sometimes imagine the future generations who would walk on worlds not yet named, who would study stars not yet charted, who would inherit both the wonders and the mistakes of their ancestors. He hoped they would remember that progress is not measured by how fast we move, but by how carefully we choose our direction. And so, even as age softened his steps and slowed his pace, his influence continued to move steadily forward, carried by the students he had taught, the scientists he had guided, the policies he had shaped, and the countless individuals who had learned from his example that a life of quiet dedication can leave the deepest mark. With time, Farouk El-Baz began to think more often about legacy, not as something to be claimed, but as something that forms naturally from how a person lives. He never sought monuments or public praise. What mattered to him was the continuity of thought, the quiet transfer of understanding from one generation to the next, the way ideas survive long after their originator has stepped aside. He believed the greatest gift a teacher could offer was not information, but confidence. The confidence to ask, to doubt, to explore. He often said that when students stop questioning, civilizations begin to fade. Curiosity, in his mind, was the heartbeat of human survival. He watched with gentle concern as some societies drifted away from deep learning, favoring quick answers and shallow certainty. He reminded anyone who would listen that the Earth itself took millions of years to write its story, and that no human problem worth solving could ever be rushed without cost. Farouk's days became quieter, but no less full. He read, he wrote, he advised, he reflected. Visitors continued to arrive, some seeking scientific counsel, others seeking personal guidance, many simply wanting to sit with a man whose presence made complex questions feel lighter. He listened more than he spoke, and when he spoke, he chose his words with care. He had witnessed the fragile balance of nature from both Earth and orbit. He had watched glaciers retreat, deserts expand, rivers struggle. He understood that the planet was not reacting to humanity's intentions, but to humanity's actions. And so he continued his quiet advocacy for environmental responsibility, not from alarmism, but from knowledge. In conversations about the future of Egypt and the Arab world, he remained hopeful. He believed that the region's long history of scholarship, trade, and innovation could rise again if nurtured with the right values. He encouraged cooperation across borders, across disciplines, across generations. He insisted that isolation, whether intellectual or political, only weakened societies. As age deepened his perspective, Farouk spoke more openly about the nature of time. He had lived long enough to see ideas dismissed as impossible become ordinary, and to watch certain certainties dissolve under new evidence. This taught him humility. He knew that the most dangerous words a scientist could utter were, "We already know." At night, the sky still held him. Sometimes he would step outside, away from artificial lights, and let the stars settle his thoughts. He felt no urgency to solve the universe. It was enough to participate in it. He had traveled far from the boy who once walked beside the Nile canals, yet in truth he had never left that path. The same curiosity, the same attentiveness, the same quiet determination continued to guide him. The tools had changed, the horizons had expanded, but the inner journey remained constant. As Farouk El-Baz grew older, the world seemed to lean toward him in a different way. Where once he had been the eager learner, then the active builder, he now became the steady reference point, a quiet compass in a time of accelerating change. People did not come to him for dramatic answers. They came because his presence slowed their thoughts, because his way of seeing made complexity feel manageable, because his life itself had become a demonstration of how calm persistence can outlast noise. He often reflected on the strange journey of humanity, how a species born from dust had learned to read the dust of other worlds, how a boy who once traced patterns in the soil of the Delta had helped humans trace their first steps on the moon. The scale of it never overwhelmed him. Instead, it humbled him. He saw human achievement not as conquest, but as conversation with the universe. A long dialogue written in equations, stories, mistakes, and small breakthroughs. He spoke more frequently about the responsibility of knowledge. He worried that information, when divorced from wisdom, could become dangerous. He reminded students and leaders alike that science without ethics is blind, and ethics without knowledge is powerless. The two, he believed, must always walk together. Even in his later years, he refused to withdraw from the world. He remained engaged in discussions of climate, water, sustainability, development, and education. He followed scientific discoveries with genuine excitement. New images from space, new explorations of Mars, new telescopes peering deeper into the cosmos. All of these filled him with the same wonder he had felt decades earlier. His curiosity did not retire. He observed modern society's struggle with distraction. The constant flood of images and opinions concerned him, not because technology itself was harmful, but because it threatened to erode the patience required for understanding. He encouraged people to protect their inner stillness, to cultivate silence, to allow ideas time to grow. When asked what had guided his life, he rarely spoke of ambition. He spoke of listening. Listening to the land, listening to data, listening to students, listening to doubt, listening to the quiet voice inside that says, "Look closer, stay longer, think deeper." He believed that every human being is born with this ability, but many are taught to abandon it too quickly. His life, in its entirety, became an argument for holding on to it. And so the years continued, each one adding another layer of memory, another ring in the tree of his experience. The world changed around him, yet he remained rooted, not in the past, but in principles that did not age: curiosity, patience, humility, responsibility, hope. He had no illusions about immortality. He understood that every life, no matter how full, is brief against the scale of time. But he also understood something else, that influence does not end where life ends. It continues in the minds that were shaped, the questions that were awakened, the paths that were opened. He had opened many. In the present years of his life, Farouk El-Baz stands as both participant and witness in the great unfolding story of humanity. He is no longer at the front lines of laboratories or launch pads, yet his presence continues to echo through them. The scientists, engineers, educators, and thinkers who pass through today's institutions carry with them traces of his work, whether they know his name or not. Knowledge travels this way, quietly, invisibly, from mind to mind, long after its source has stepped aside. He observes the world with a deep and patient awareness. He watches young people wrestle with uncertainty in a time of immense change, and he understands their confusion. He reminds them that confusion is not failure. It is the doorway to understanding. He reminds them that even the moon, which now seems so familiar, was once an unsolved mystery, and that the path to its surface was paved with questions, mistakes, and long nights of doubt. He continues to advocate for science, not as a profession, but as a way of seeing. He believes the scientific mind is one that learns to be comfortable with uncertainty, one that treats every answer as provisional, every discovery as the beginning of new questions. This, he says, is not weakness. It is strength. In conversations about the future of Earth, he does not speak in terms of doom or salvation. He speaks of responsibility, of learning from the long memory of the planet, of understanding that nature always responds honestly to human behavior. If humans act with care, the Earth responds with resilience. If they act with neglect, the Earth responds with consequence. There is no anger in nature, only balance. He still returns in his thoughts to the deserts. He remembers the ancient rivers now buried beneath sand, the civilizations that rose and fell along their banks, the long patience of the land, waiting for those willing to read its language again. These memories give him both caution and hope. Humanity has made mistakes before, and humanity has learned from them before. The future remains open. Though age has slowed his movements, it has not dimmed his spirit. He wakes each day with gratitude for the simple gift of awareness, for the ability to observe the world with a mind that remains curious. He understands that many people live without ever truly seeing, without ever pausing long enough to ask why the world is as it is. His life, he knows, has been a rare privilege of extended attention. Sometimes, in quiet moments, he reflects on the full arc of his journey. The boy in the Nile Delta, the student in Cairo, the young scientist in America, the geologist guiding astronauts on another world, the teacher shaping generations, the elder watching humanity step into an uncertain future with both hope and concern. The path has been long, coherent, and deeply human. He does not think in terms of endings. He thinks in terms of continuity. The universe does not conclude stories. It transforms them. And so his life continues, not as a monument, not as a finished chapter, but as an ongoing presence within the larger human narrative. A gentle reminder that greatness does not require noise, that progress does not demand arrogance, that the deepest journeys are those made with patience, curiosity, and care. As Farouk El-Baz continues through the later chapters of his life, he grows increasingly aware of how rare it is for a human being to witness so much change within a single lifetime. He has seen the transformation of societies, the reshaping of continents by politics and technology, the rise and fall of ideas once thought permanent. Yet through all this movement, he has come to believe that the deepest forces shaping humanity are still the same ones that guided people thousands of years ago. Curiosity, fear, hope, and the longing to understand where we belong in the vastness of existence. He watches the younger generations navigate a world that feels overwhelming in its speed and complexity. He does not envy them, but he believes in them. He believes that every generation faces its own impossible questions, and that the answers emerge not from certainty, but from perseverance. He encourages them to slow their minds, to resist the pressure of instant conclusions, to protect their capacity for deep attention. He tells them that knowledge is not something to be collected, but something to be cultivated. When he thinks of the future, he does not imagine machines replacing humanity or technology solving every problem. He imagines people learning, slowly and imperfectly, how to live with greater awareness of the planet they inhabit and the universe that surrounds them. He imagines cooperation replacing conflict, not because conflict disappears, but because understanding grows strong enough to restrain it. He remains deeply connected to Egypt, following its struggles, its cultural shifts, its search for direction. He speaks of its young minds with pride and concern, knowing that the potential of a nation lies not in its monuments, but in its classrooms. He urges investment in education as the most enduring form of development. He reminds leaders that the true wealth of a country is not buried in its soil, but awakened in its people. In his private reflections, Farouk returns often to the idea of scale. He has spent his life moving between the smallest details of stone and the largest perspectives of space. This has given him a rare sense of proportion. Human problems, he knows, are both enormous and small. Enormous in their impact on individual lives, and small against the backdrop of cosmic time. This dual awareness makes him compassionate without becoming overwhelmed. He finds peace in the knowledge that he has lived his values, that he has chosen understanding over ego, patience over haste, curiosity over fear, that he has served something larger than himself without losing himself in the process. And so, as each new day arrives, he greets it not as an obligation, but as an invitation to observe, to learn, to reflect, to participate once more in the endless conversation between humanity and the universe. As the seasons continue to pass, Farouk El-Baz finds a gentle harmony between memory and presence. He does not cling to the past, nor does he rush toward the future. He exists in the long middle of awareness, where understanding deepens and urgency fades into clarity. The world often feels louder than ever, yet within him there is a growing stillness, the kind that only time and reflection can build. He thinks often about the nature of human progress. He has seen triumphs celebrated as endings when they were only beginnings, and failures dismissed as conclusions when they were simply pauses in learning. From the moon missions to the modern era of space exploration, he has witnessed humanity's persistent desire to reach beyond itself, not out of greed, but out of a longing to understand its place in the cosmos. He knows this desire will never fade, because it is woven into the human spirit. He believes that science, at its best, is a form of humility. It teaches humans how much they do not yet know. It teaches them to approach the universe with care, to ask questions gently, to accept uncertainty as a companion rather than an enemy. He worries that when people forget this humility, knowledge becomes brittle and power becomes dangerous. In quiet conversations, he encourages others to cultivate inner stillness, He believes that without stillness, there can be no real insight. Without insight, decisions become shallow. Without depth, societies drift. He does not offer this as philosophy, but as observation, drawn from decades of watching patterns repeat across nature and history. He reflects on how unlikely his own journey has been. A child born beside the Nile, guided by curiosity, shaped by education, carried across oceans, entrusted with the safety of astronauts on another world, and returned again and again to the simple work of teaching and learning. It feels at times unreal to him, yet he accepts it with gratitude rather than astonishment. What gives him the greatest peace is not the list of accomplishments attached to his name, but the knowledge that he has remained faithful to the questions that first awakened his mind. He has not abandoned wonder. He has not surrendered patience. He has not replaced understanding with certainty. As he looks toward the horizon of his remaining years, he does not feel fear. He feels a quiet readiness. He understands that every life, no matter how full, eventually becomes a story passed from one voice to another. What matters is not how long the story lasts, but what it teaches those who listen. And so his days unfold gently now, each one an echo of the long journey that carried him from riverbanks to rocket launches, from classrooms to control rooms, from deserts to stars, and back again to the steady ground of human connection. He remains what he has always been, a listener, a learner, a guide. As Farouk El-Baz continues to walk the remaining path of his life, he does so without urgency, without regret, and without the need to prove anything further to the world. He has come to understand that a meaningful life is not measured by the noise it generates, but by the quiet continuity it leaves behind. He has learned that influence, when it is true, does not announce itself. It flows gently from one mind to another, from one generation to the next, shaping the world long after its source has moved on. He watches the new age of exploration unfold with calm fascination. New spacecraft travel farther. New telescopes see deeper. New minds ask questions once unimaginable. He feels no sense of replacement or distance from these advances. Instead, he feels part of them, as though the work he and his generation began is simply continuing through younger hands, carrying the same torch of curiosity forward through time. In moments of solitude, he often returns to the simplest truth he has discovered, that the universe is not something to be conquered, but something to be understood. That humanity's greatest strength lies not in control, but in cooperation with one another, with nature, with the unknown. He believes this understanding will be humanity's most valuable inheritance. He reflects on his homeland with enduring affection. Egypt remains for him not just a place of birth, but a living memory of where his questions began. He hopes that future generations there will rediscover the joy of inquiry, the dignity of knowledge, the courage of critical thinking. He hopes they will remember that the ancient civilizations of the Nile were built not only on stone, but on wisdom, patience, and respect for the rhythms of the natural world. As the years continue to pass, he feels a growing peace with the long arc of his life. He knows that no journey is perfect, no understanding complete, no story fully finished. Yet he also knows that he has lived in harmony with the values that first awakened him: curiosity, humility, patience, and care. Sometimes, when the world grows quiet and the night sky opens above him, he stands still and listens, just as he did as a boy, to the vast, silent conversation between Earth and the stars. He does not seek answers from that silence. He simply belongs within it. And in that belonging, he finds rest. The story of Farouk El-Baz does not end with titles or achievements or monuments. It continues wherever a young mind pauses to ask a careful question. It continues wherever a student chooses patience over haste, understanding over assumption, curiosity over fear. It continues wherever someone looks at the land, the sky, or the universe itself and decides to listen. The train moves steadily through the night now, carrying his story onward, through the dreams of those who hear it, through the quiet hours where understanding grows most gently, and into the long future where every thoughtful life becomes part of humanity's shared journey. And so the night deepens, the rails whisper, the stars keep their ancient watch, and the story of a boy from the Nile who helped humanity walk upon the moon drifts softly into sleep, not as an ending, but as a promise that wonder, once awakened, never truly fades.